colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar on understanding and combating intersectional discrimination in housing for people with a migratory background. My name is Roberto Turin. I'm the head of Mixed Migration Center Europe, and I'll be opening and then guiding you through the webinar today. So the current housing crisis in Europe is an emerging and pressing topic, with average rent in the EU almost 25% higher at the end of 23 than in 2010. The housing situation is really becoming an issue of concern. Housing and affordability excludes part of the population from stable housing and leads to housing insecurity, problematic housing costs, and inadequate living conditions. More importantly, perhaps, it also contributes to unequal living condition opportunity and therefore further exacerbating inequality in Europe. For all the above, some have defined this crisis as one of the main social issues of the 21st century. Importantly, the housing crisis disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable group in our society. Migrants, including second-generation individuals, often find themselves amongst these vulnerable groups, frequently due to discrimination. Examining the intersection between migration, access to housing, and discrimination is therefore both crucial and very timely. And this is precisely what the research conducted under the Common Project, which we'll be presenting and discussing today, addresses. The intersectional research we have conducted illustrates the channel that the people with migratory background uses to seek housing, the obstacle they face, the resilience strategies, and the perspective of landlord and other housing market actors. The research also highlights the various grounds for discrimination that people experience, such as ethnic background, gender, age, religion, disability, and sexual orientation, and how these factors interact and impact access to housing. As MMC Europe, we are very proud to have contributed to this research and to the overall project, because it's very much in line with our priorities. We've been focusing on the condition of migrants in Europe from various perspectives, and housing is a critical element of this. Secondly, our mission at MMC is to produce research for a purpose, and that's exactly what CAMOM does. As my colleague Francesca from DRC Italy will explain in more detail a bit later, the project uses research not only to understand discrimination, but also to combat it. So now, before handing over to Francesca and starting the webinar, let's have a very quick look at the agenda. And I'm also going to mention very quickly a couple of housekeeping rules. So as far as the agenda is concerned, we already start with welcome introduction. Francesca Pisano and Sorcha Erwat will also say a few words. For Sorcha, is going to be video recorded. Francesca is from the Danish Refugee Council Italia, and Sorcha from Housing Europe. We'll then move to the presentation of the research finding for the 3 case studies, Turin, Malta, and Thessaloniki, with colleagues from Mixed Migration Center, SOS Malta, and TAD presenting the research that they conducted in the 3 cities and in Malta. Then we will be moving to breakout sessions. You will have to decide which breakout session you want to join. You cannot join more than one. And then we will be showing you a bit later the guiding question for this breakout session. We will have there some opening remarks by some colleagues from other organizations who accepted to open by providing a bit their views. And we have Jakub Kibeida, Executive Director from Mosaico organization. We have Edith Lakatos, Senior Policy Officer from Housing Europe. And we have Yorgos Floros from the Blue Refugee Center, part of Solidarity Now. We will then come back into plenary. There we will have a rapporteur from the various breakout sessions quickly presenting the key finding of their discussion based on the guiding question that we will use. And then our colleague Liat Rogel from the Come Home Consortium and from Impact Housing Foundation is going to wrap up and close. All this to say that we have quite a compressed program and agenda for 1.5 hours, and I'm already going beyond the time that was allocated to me, so I'll close now and hand over to Francesca. One last thing before. Housekeeping rule I mentioned. So the basic, so please unmute yourself and keep your camera off. Of course, not in the breakout session, where you're more than welcome to intervene and participate. And then if you have any question, please keep question for the breakout session, where you will be able to ask all your questions. If it is something more general about the project, not on a specific case study, please send your question in the chat, and then we will make sure to leave some time in the closing to address at least some of those. And without further ado, Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Come Home Project Partners. My name is Francesca Pisano. I am the program manager of the Danish Refugee Council Italia, that is the lead of the Come Home Consortium. Come Home is a European Commission funded project under the SERVE program, and it's a project that started in 2023 from the initiative of organizations from Italy, namely the Danish Refugee Council Italy and Impact Housing Foundation, from Greece with the Major Development Agency, and from Malta with SOS Malta, all supported by the Mixed Migration Center. The mission of the project Come Home is to promote equality in urban environments with a strong focus on improving access to housing for people with migratory backgrounds in the city of Torino, in the city of Thessaloniki, and in Malta. And to do so, we seek to deeply understand the multifaceted nature of housing discrimination faced by individuals, exploring the underlying motivations behind it and engaging with key stakeholders involved in this issue to find together new solutions. Within the project, we don't only aim at delving into the reasons behind housing discrimination in these 3 locations, but we also want to raise awareness by sharing effective practices implemented across Europe to tackle the issue, and moreover, taking actionable steps by providing new tools and new strategies to combat discrimination and access to housing for people with migratory backgrounds, I would say in the whole Europe. So thank you for joining us in our work to create more inclusive housing solutions and to foster more equitable communities in the European Union. And we look very much forward to your insights during this event today. I'll give the floor back to Roberto, and thank you again.
Thank you, Francesca. We now have a video recording from Social Edward Housing Europe, which I'm going to screen now. Hopefully it will work.
All the colleagues there in Malta and those joining online. Many of you already are familiar with Housing Europe. We're working for better housing outcomes at European level, so better regulation and finance, and of course better knowledge. And this is why we very much welcome today's event and the launch of the results of the Come Home project. This is obviously an issue that goes to the heart of the European project. And what's vital about the Come Home project is that you are actually bringing the individual stories and individual experiences of those arriving in Europe and highlighting the challenges they face to access housing and get on with their lives. So it's a really important contribution to the debate that is now happening So we hope that we can really use the results that you have come up with based on your work in Turin, Thessaloniki and Malta. And we look forward to continuing the collaboration together. So best of luck with the event today and we look forward to future collaboration.
Okay.
To all the colleagues there.
Oops. Thanks to Sorcha. We'll convey this thank a bit later. I understand there was some issue with the volume. Nothing we could do on the spot. If someone has could not really understand, you can write us. We can send you the recording so that you can re-listen to it. But now we move to the core, if you like, of the webinar, which is the presentation of the research finding for the three case studies. So we will start with a slide summarizing the methodology, because it has been the same for the three case studies, so for Turin, Thessaloniki and Malta. And after that, the three sort of lead researcher for MMC, NTAT, and SOS Malta will present the key finding. It should be taking no more than half an hour. And after that, I'm going to open the breakout session. But so now, Julia, what is yours for the methodology and to start with Torino?
Okay. Thank you very much, Roberto. Good afternoon, everyone. I will indeed start with a quick mention to the methodology before starting to talk about Turin. As Roberto mentioned, we use the same research methodology across the three locations in order to be able to compare the findings. Come Home is a mixed methods research project, meaning that we collected both quantitative and qualitative data. We interviewed two different groups of respondents. On the one hand, we had interviews with people with a migratory background. For this group, we only recruited people who have a regular status in the country of interview. We interviewed people coming from Africa, Asia, or Europe. And we also selected people who have been living in the country of interview for different amounts of time to try and understand if their situation and their access to housing changed with the passing of time. So on the one hand, we interviewed people with a migratory background. On the other hand, we also interviewed those who are on the other side of the housing market, let's say, meaning housing gatekeepers. This includes landlords, real estate agencies, and other housing intermediaries, but also some migration experts and policymakers. So we have different perspectives included in the research. Just a quick disclaimer, please remember, as you will listen to the presentation of the findings, please remember that the findings from the project are indicative. They are not statistically representative of the situation for the entire migrant population with a migratory background in the three cities. And also remember that some population groups, such as, for instance, LGBTI people or people with disabilities, are underrepresented in the report in the project. So it was easier. It was more difficult to access them, meaning that unfortunately we could not represent their specific challenges as well as we did for other profiles. Having said this, I'm sorry I'm running, but I know that we're tight on time. I suggest, Roberto, that we skip to the next slide and we start talking about Turin specifically. It's loading. Perfect. Yes. Okay, so for Turin specifically, in order to better understand what is the situation regarding access to housing for people with a migratory background, we collected 300 quantitative surveys with people with a migratory background. Additionally, we organized 4 focus group discussions to better understand the specific situation of second-generation migrants living in Turin, migrant youth, migrant families, and long-term residents, meaning people who have been living in Turin for at least 15 years. Additionally, as I was saying, we also interviewed 10 key informants. These key informants included migration experts, policymakers, landlords, real estate agencies, and housing intermediaries coming from civil society. So a wide array of different perspectives. Roberto, can we please move to the next one? Thank you. I'm just going to very quickly give you some context regarding Turin as a city and its migrant population, just for you to have it as a background when we will be presenting the findings from the research for Come Home. Turin is one of Italy's biggest cities. It has quite a sizable share of migrant residents, foreign residents, I should say. Approximately 16% of the population of Turin are foreign nationals. Of course, we're talking about people with a regular immigration status. So the entire migrant population is very likely higher than this. European nationals make up almost half of this foreign population, while Africans, Asians, and Latin Americans are represented in smaller groups. But it is worth mentioning that since 2017, the share of European nationals living in Turin has been constantly decreasing. On the contrary, in parallel, the share of nationals from African countries, Asian countries, and Latin American countries has been increasing. So the overall migrant population has remained the same, but the region of origin has been changing. These regarding the foreign population living in the city. Moving on to give you an idea of what are the relevant housing systems in Turin. In Italy and in Turin as a city, the private housing market is the main source of housing, meaning that the vast majority of residents find their house in the private market. In addition to the private market, however, Italy as a country and Turin as a city do count with a public subsidized housing system, which aims at increasing access to housing for underprivileged segments of the population. This system, the public housing system, however, faces strong challenges. It has been facing challenges for a long time. It is underfunded, and there is a chronic shortage of housing units available in this system, meaning that the public housing system cannot cope with the demand. Additionally to the private market and the public housing system, in Turin, we also find some very small social housing programs managed by different types of civil society actors, both NGOs and for-profit civil society actors. So these are the three main systems that we find in the city. What are the main challenges that residents in Turin face when they look for a place to stay, when they look for housing? The first and foremost challenge for everyone, not just migrants, not just people with a migratory background, is affordability. Housing costs are increasing and salaries are stagnating. So affordability has become an issue. There is also a decreasing availability of housing for rent. And last but not least, there are often stringent requirements to be able to obtain an apartment for rent. Thank you, Roberto. I saw that you already moved. Fantastic. So this was the context. Let's start talking about what the surveys with the respondents told us about their experience looking for housing in Turin. First of all, with regard to how people with a migratory background look for housing, as you can see in the graph in the slide, they mostly use informal channels to look for housing. If you have a look, if you combine word of mouth among other migrants and word of mouth among local contacts, you see that they are the two main channels that people with a migratory background use in Turin to find housing. The use of formal real estate agencies is lower in comparison, but it is actually higher between longer term residents, meaning that, you know, the longer people stay in Turin, the more they use more structured channels. And one last comment on this slide, I think it's worth noting that that other, let's say, more institutional or structured channels to look for housing, such as municipal services, such as Locare, or NGO programs, are actually used much less. The reliance on this kind of channels is much more limited. Strategies vary from one region of origin for the respondents to another, but in general, you see that that the respondents used a variety of different channels at the same time, and some trends are common across regions. Roberto, we can move to the next one.
Yeah, Julia, you have
Yes.
2 minutes left for the
Yes,
remaining
yes.
slide, so I think you
Yes,
have
I
to
will
speed up
rush.
a bit. Yeah.
Yes, that's okay. Okay, so regarding obstacles to finding housing, Roberto and Francesca have been talking about discrimination and other obstacles. Slightly more than half of our respondents in Turin told us that they have been discriminated when they were looking for housing. The experience of discrimination has been different depending on the region of origin. It has been reported much more frequently by African respondents, respondents of African origin and Asian origin compared to Europeans. You can see in the slide that the main discrimination ground when looking for housing has been reported as being ethnicity. And again, experiences have been changing a lot between the different regions. For instance, African respondents frequently mentioned skin color, while other groups mentioned other aspects of their identity. A couple of more comments on this, on discrimination. Female respondents more often reported having been discriminated against based on several reasons instead of just ethnicity. And the main perpetrators for this discrimination have been reported as being the landlords themselves. Discrimination is not the only obstacle. Very quickly, economic obstacles have also been reported by a majority of respondents. So discrimination is one part of the picture, unfortunately not the entire picture. Now we can move on, Roberto, to the next slide. Thank you. I mentioned that we also interviewed housing gatekeepers to ask them about their own perception of people with a migratory background in the housing market. What came out of these conversations is that landlords are mostly concerned about the financial solvency of their tenants. This applies to everyone, but it applies in particular and in a stronger way to people with a migratory background, which are facing basically an additional layer of challenges. For this reason, some civil society organizations have started acting as intermediaries in social housing projects to facilitate the connection and trust between tenants with a migratory background and landlords. If financial solvency was a big part of the picture, racial discrimination and stereotypes have also been coming up in the interviews. The main findings told us that landlords rarely openly discriminate against prospective tenants with a migratory background. They usually use excuses such as, the apartment has just been rented, but people have a clear perception that this is indeed an excuse and not really what's going on. And some nationalities, some regions of origin seem to be particularly affected by these stereotypes more than others. So not all migrants, not all people with a migratory background have the same experience. Roberto, we can move on to the following slide.
And then you have really 1 minute left.
Yes, it's the last one, so we're good. So what do people with a migratory background do when faced with these obstacles? They employ a number of resilience strategies. Most of these strategies imply relying on personal contacts. So once again, there is more reliance on personal contacts rather than institutions, rather than NGOs, rather than more official or structured actors, as you can see in the slide. Public housing is not considered as a valid alternative because, as we said at the beginning, the offer is very limited and it's very difficult to get access to it. In addition to relying on contacts and friends, there is generally, let's say, decent knowledge about rent subsidies available in Turin and in Italy in general, and a decent use of them. There is a much more limited knowledge regarding the existence of legal remedies for victims of discrimination, and an even more limited use of these legal remedies, although they exist. So to conclude, basically, reliance on informal channels and personal contacts, both to look for housing and to overcome obstacles, seems to be prevalent in Turin. And with this, I try to rush as much as possible to comply with the timeline. Thank you, and I will hand over the floor to Emdat.
Hello from my part. Thank you, Julia. I will shortly present the findings from Thessaloniki. You will see there are several common patterns of what came out. Differences, of course, are there also. I'm Dimitra Sjetica. Just to introduce myself, I'm a researcher on housing, and I'm collaborating with the major developmental agency of Thessaloniki on this research, which was implemented in collaboration with Solidarity Now. We follow the same, let's say, methodology, so I will not go into the details. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just to give you a context, Thessaloniki is the second largest metropolitan city of Greece. It has about 1.1 million people, and 1/3 is at the core, the municipality of Thessaloniki. And approximately, according to the last census, however, about 6% of the region's populations are foreign nationals. Again, according to the census of 2011, the largest ethnic group were Albanians, almost half. All other communities, ethnic communities, are much, much smaller. Let's say, starting with the second largest, which are from Georgia, 0.05. So there's a big difference. And much less from Asia. However, the migration landscape has changed a lot since the economic crisis and the so-called refugee crisis in 2015, as many of the earlier migrants fled away from the country to find jobs and more stable environments since the crisis. But also we had newcomers from Asia and Africa after 2015. Housing in Greece belongs, let's say, to the housing system, to the Southern European model. It is much based on home ownership and very much market-led. Almost 2/3 live in owner occupation. The rental market is about 20%, and there's also 1% provided for free, mainly by family members, because the particularity of Greece is that it does not have any social rented sector at all. So everything is in the private market, let's say. What there is as a main housing policy tool is a national rent benefit, which was instituted in 2019, and very small scale supported mediated housing programs in the private rental market. They were developed a lot as an accommodation reception system and temporary accommodation for refugees since 2015, but also this part has been very much reduced the last year, so there is very, very little support. And of course, as mentioned, rising prices in disproportion to local incomes is a major problem the last years, including energy prices, housing costs that have increased together with the overall living cost crisis, and very limited availability of adequate housing. A lot of pressure in the housing market and the stock by trends that change its use for touristic uses and speculative investment by foreign capital, but also a change in the purpose, let's say, of the available housing stock, which is also quite old and very often not very well maintained. So there are really a lack of affordable housing options, particularly for vulnerable populations as migrants. Next, please. Thank you. So regarding what came out regarding the search strategies, what are the most commonly used channels to look for a house for the migrant population? They mostly use advertisement. They use a lot migrant contacts and real estate agencies. To a lesser extent, non-migrant contacts, informal brokers, mediators, social media, and NGOs. You can see the numbers. As it came out also in Torino, personal contacts, informal contacts, and particularly access to information through the internet came out as the most important and helpful channels for finding a home for the migrant population. Formal agencies, services, NGOs seem to be less helpful in this. Also, one important thing is that came out is that more than half of respondents were not aware of available housing support. And of course, this varies according to the time of arrival and also the status, let's say. Next, please. Now, 75% of respondents reported discrimination, that they face discrimination when looking for a house. 63% reported economic obstacles, like having to pay high deposits, having to face high prices, or not having a stable job or income to pay for housing costs. And 41% reported lack of language skills as obstacles. These are, let's say, the main three obstacles that the migrant population faces when looking for a house. And among that, as you can see in the graph, ethnicity was by far reported as the main reason, and it is related either to nationality, to the migrant or refugee identity, and to skin color, particularly for migrants from the African region. Household composition was the second, let's say, factor mentioned mostly, but ethnicity is number one. And what the impacts are of that is that they find it difficult. It's more difficult for them, and that's what they responded, to find a house. And they very often have to comply with worse housing conditions. They have to accept houses that are in really bad condition. They often also feel exploited, that they have to pay more rent or pay more deposit than, let's say, locals. And also, very often discrimination remains also after finding a house, mostly by neighbors, but also by the landlords themselves. And also we have to say, as it came out, that the persons that have a visible, let's say, distinctive characteristics like the skin color or a symbol in a religious symbol, let's say, that is visible, they're really much more discriminated against. And also some household compositions like single men or single mothers, which are for different reasons considered not good as tenants in the market. Next, please.
Dimitra, 2 minutes left.
Yes, the two last slides. So as I said, the economic crisis has shaped a lot, and the increasing refugee, let's say, flow since 2000 has shaped a lot the perceptions and the attitudes. Landlords are reluctant to rent to migrants because they think they lack enough and stable income. They fail to provide guarantees. They feel they risk to mistreat the house or have bad neighbor relations because they don't know the local context. They don't know the responsibilities that are linked to a lease agreement or prevailing social norms. And they mention also different cultural habits. Of course, many of everyday practices that might lead to tensions among neighbors are common, but it seems that they're much less tolerated by people with a migratory background. And this is an issue. Market agents appear more natural, let's say, accessible, but still they often, through their own practice, reproduce discriminating perceptions. They contribute in a way to informal redlining or filtering by directing migrants to specific sub-markets of housing sub-markets, or by not showing them opportunities. And also to mention that social and public services and social programs seem to have contributed to, let's say, bending stereotypes. And when support is available, it seems to be easier to access housing for migrant population, but they very often also contribute to some kind of social filtering by choosing or being able, due to not sufficiently staffing or having resources, being able only to serve those that are more housing ready or that are less vulnerable. Next, please. Roberto, next slide, please.
Sorry,
it's loading, okay.
No.
We'll take one more minute.
Yeah, I need to find a way to go back to the presentation. Just give me a sec.
Yes. Well, what is coming is what they do to make their way in this difficult situation in the housing market. And as it came out, you will see also from Turin, migrants and people with migratory background rely mostly on personal informal networks. Migrants from their community or even non-migrant locals, but they are already related to them. They are much, they give much help to tipping them or directly bringing them in contact with the landlord. Reliance on NGOs was reported only by the 50%. And what is, I think, worrying and can be very much improved is that only 2% relied on public authorities or social services. So this was the first point. Also, it's okay. As you can see, less than half were aware that there are rent subsidies. Again, due to the criteria for eligibility. For example, a recent arrival, those that have arrived recently maybe not eligible for these, but however, they were not aware, and only 60% had obtained them. 21% were aware of legal remedies, having in mind mostly the anti-racist law and not exactly what that meant to them directly, what they could do with it. But only 3% reported having, let's say, used such remedies. And finally, to close, what came out particularly in all focus groups and discussion with experts and stakeholders was that the available housing support is very few, unstable, and very often inadequate. So there is a big margin, let's say, to improve and to capitalize on what has been learned and achieved through the mediated programs that have been housing programs that have been implemented in the previous years. So that's it from me.
Thank you, colleagues from that. Now we move to the last case study from Malta. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rachel. I'm an urban anthropologist and the lead researcher for SOS Malta on this project. So I'll be presenting the research findings from Malta. Similarly, we took a mixed method approach where we conducted 200 surveys. We had 4 focus groups as well, mainly with the migrant community. And here what differs is the type of groups that we communicated with, who were mainly community leaders, second-generation migrants, the LGBTIQ+, and homeless migrants as well. It's important to note here that when we approach second-generation migrants, they basically stated that they didn't want to participate in the project for the reasons that they felt integrated. So we did conduct a focus group with them to seek to get more in-depth information. And also we conducted 10 key informant interviews with housing stakeholders. And out of these, we looked at experts, policymakers, landlords, and letting agents. Next slide, please. Okay, according to the latest census of housing and population studies, which was conducted in 2021, Malta has experienced a five-fold increase in its population, its foreign population, which basically comes to 20% of our Maltese population. Yeah, the top four nationalities were reported as being mainly Italians that comprise 12% of these, 20%. At the same time, when it comes to non-European citizens, we had mainly Indians at 16%, followed by Filipinos. Our chosen area for the research, since Malta doesn't have a capital city, cannot be compared to that of Thessaloniki or Turin, we took Malta as a whole, which can be compared to basically these two cities. Hence, we, according to this national statistics, because the northern regions mainly house 31% of the total population, but also it has the highest migrant population. When it comes to housings, to our housing system, Malta actually has a functioning housing system. The legal regulator is the Malta Housing Authority, and it regulates social and affordable housing. And more recently, we implemented the Private Residential Leases Act in 2020, which is regulating the market. Additionally, because of our statistics beyond this project, that has shown that there has been some overcrowding, we started enforcing an existing law on use classes, which will not allow more than 6 people to live together. As you can see, we also have a similar perspective towards home ownership, where 75% of the Maltese own their home. And it's quite interesting to note that 57% are outright owners, out of which we have almost 45% that own their home without actually carrying a loan. In relation to housing challenges, these are common, like our colleagues from Italy and Torino, with the difference that we do have adequate and affordable housing. However, these are not the prices because till now we don't have a rental index. These are not, basically the rents are not regulated. So when migrants seek to, and other people who are at the risk of poverty or the new middle class, basically find them expensive in relation to their income. So it's not about the stock, but about the price. Next slide, please.
Rachel, they are telling me that the voice comes and goes. Perhaps if it is linked to your mic, you might want to be sure you remain close. Otherwise, it's still quite clear, so don't worry.
Okay, is this any better like this?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, if only I knew before. I'm sorry. Okay, so in regarding to house strategies, you can see a difference here as well, where people with a migratory background resorted to social media, followed by word of mouth, formal housing agencies, and then word of mouth amongst personal contacts. What is interesting as well is that I'll jump to the third point before, because we can see that the word of mouth among non-migrants was also common. And it was because they were trusted people. However, formal agencies and NGOs were minimally reported. And when it comes to formal housing agency, here we saw that it's because they either found them on the internet or once again because they were recommended by other migrants. And we had 67% that reported not being aware of our rent subsidies. Next. Now, when it comes to obstacles in finding housing, we did ask this question, which was the same across all the 3 projects. Why have you been discriminated against? So in total, we had 39% of respondents that reported discrimination when looking for a house, whilst 55% stated that they had economic obstacles. On the contrary, though, 98%, that is 195 persons of the sample, stated that they knew about, they did not have any legal obstacles. And as you can see, and perhaps with no surprise, ethnicity emerged as the reasons why they felt or assumed they were discriminated against because of their nationality. And this followed with household composition, and the rest was based on gender, hardly on religion, age, and some said, I don't know. And you can see on the right hand of the slide that this varied across the nationalities, where Europe and Asia were quite similar, whilst Africans we had a higher number. Next slide.
And
Now, this
2
was
minutes
really
left,
interesting.
Rachel.
Sorry?
2 minutes left.
That's perfect. So when it comes to the gatekeepers' perceptions, we had some really interesting comparisons here. So private landlords mainly perceive housing composition as an issue, and this is data coming from the qualitative research, right? Not from the survey. And they tended to prefer couples and single tenants, and some would say no pets, no children, but this went beyond migration because they stated the same even for the locals. What is also interesting is that during these interviews, they brought up both bad and good experiences. And it was this that actually led to their generalized perception according to certain nationalities. And this was related to property upkeep, food smells, cleanliness, late payments, and utility bills. However, some also stated and brought up examples that amicable relations were maintained when possible. In contrast, we had letting agents that seemed to be more sympathetic to the financial situation of migrants. And basically, they encountered a common discriminatory response due to bad experiences. I'm not a racist, but. And in fact, this was perhaps reinforced because of deposits, which varied, by landlords, language as a big barrier, and a letting agent who has been operating in the field for the past 15 years stated how this has changed over time. When I started my job, it was Libyans, and now it is basically Indians, and their food smells. And the last slide, which shouldn't take me long, when it comes to resilience strategies, this was actually something to think about, because 51% basically responded not taking any action to overcome these barriers. And they mainly relied on other migrants and did not seek NGO, social services, or any, or family support. 43% were also aware of legal remedies, mostly stated that they did not use them, and 32% were aware of these rent subsidies, however few obtained them. And to conclude with my last sentence, in Malta, we do have housing support institutions that are available, and there is actually a dedicated private rent sector unit based within the Malta Housing Authority, which was a reaction to the law that we implemented in order to keep the market regulated. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to Julia and the others, Rachel. And we are 5 minutes late, but which is not too bad, consider that we have really to squeeze all the three into a long presentation, basically. Now we will be breaking out to different rooms where participants will be able to discuss. We propose 3 guiding questions for each of the case studies, and these guiding questions are whether there was anything new or particularly interesting in the reports we say here, but actually in the presentation, something that stand out to you. The second is about the implication of the research for program response, practitioner response, aiming at improving housing access and integration for individuals with a migratory background. And the third is about policy. So what could be or are the potential implications of the research finding for policy responses at local, national, and EU level. So we are now going to let you choose which breakout session you want to join. If you select rooms there, you will see that you have Turin, Thessaloniki, and Malta. Please do start joining the breakout room, and then we will come back in 25 minutes. We were meant to be assigning half an hour, but we stick to 25 so as to recuperate 5 minutes. So I'll see you back in the plenary. I see that people are joining the room, which is great. And so I'll also join one. Perhaps you, if you want to stay in the main room so that if someone is stranded, you can help.
Yes, will do.
Fantastic.
And welcome back. We will give just some more seconds, even though we already have, I think, most of the people in the room. Is it true?
I think that they were automatically redirected, so they have no choice but be here.
Yeah. As usual, it's quite brutal when you are kicked out of a breakout room. And I jumped into all three rooms and saw that there was a lot of discussion and conversation. So also it's always a bit of a pity not to be able and have enough time to discuss that, but we would like just to say that this is a beginning, a way to initiate a conversation on a local level and also on a transnational level. So what I will try to do now very quickly in the 10 minutes that we have is just to ask the reporters to be super quick in giving us 2 minutes per room of the highlights or the most interesting things that, again, definitely were not discussed until all the details were said, but that can give us an idea of maybe how to organize our next meetings and on which topics. So I would like to start with Thessaloniki and ask Dimitra if she can offer us 2 minutes of link to the breakout room.
I will do my best.
I'm sorry.
I'm the first and I have to put it all together. Well, I'll just say some highlights. First, there seems to be, what struck out was that there was no difference between reporting discrimination among the region groups. Of course, there are variations which we didn't manage to show differences among regions, genders, and time of arrival. But however, the chart showed that there is a high rate of feeling of discrimination from all. The second is that it was also striking that the economic burden or the factor was not that strongly mentioned. Although it was reported by many, it seems that it comes second, and this also came out from the interviews focus groups, that even for migrants that do have the money, they cannot access housing. The other is the let's say having to go through informal paths. So the lack of an organized institutional support or places where you can access information, know about your duties and rights, how the market works, etc. Of course, that these kinds of barriers are also present when people with a migratory background, particularly with the visible characteristics of lack of language skills, have to access jobs or start a business. So these combine also with this. And in relation to the policy, let's say, perspectives, the other thing, the first thing is that we have to take into account the condition also of the housing market and the housing stock, not only the population. So we need, let's say, policies that will address more globally and for all the lack of housing and difficulties to access, together with specific measures to support groups like that have difficulties like migrants. The information is key, appears as key from our findings, access to information. Working on both sides, all parts of let's say the market, the housing system have to be part of that, landlords and migrants. And finally, it seems that when there is support, things work better. So mediation, information, translation, providing tools, providing conflict resolution or legal support. So having a service that is there both for landlords and tenants, and particularly migrant tenants, is important.
Thank you very much, Dimitra. No, that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, and then we can move, I would say, to Turin, and I would ask Anais if she could do the same as Dimitra, and in a couple of minutes give us some highlights from the questions that you looked at in the breakout room. Thank you, Dimitra.
Yes, hi everyone. So in our breakout room, we actually focused, I would say, very much on the first two questions. What stood out very much among the audience who was in the breakout room with us was the lack of access to information that seems to emerge from our findings, and especially the lack of awareness about available social housing programs and publicly funded housing programs. Not only, I mean, the lack of awareness, which also results in an even lower level of reliance on these programs. And this was noted multiple times by multiple practitioners who are engaged in responses. And so this informs directly program responses, and this touches the second question. What was also noted from these findings is that there should local funding solutions should be explored more among actors who are very, very much embedded into the context. And these potential funding solutions on a local level should be informed by stronger evidence. So our findings do point out to lack of information, but also pointed out to potential more research questions which have not been explored by our research, such as going more into detail into intersectional discrimination among specific population groups. And so the need for more stronger evidence to create a rationale for policy engagement at local level, while we haven't been really discussing
The
policy engagement at the European level, I have to say.
That's fine.
Yeah, this is my report.
Well, your last 2 points were already going also in the direction of policy recommendations, so we can get there. Thank you so much, Anais. And then I think we can close with the Malta room, and I would call Alexia to do the same very difficult job in reassuming in 2 minutes what happened in the room.
Mm-hmm. Well, the general feel of the room was that much more time was obviously needed because there was so much to discuss and we were just about getting started. But similar to what was already said, there is definitely need for more evidence, but I think it was agreed across that this is definitely a very good start and gives us the seed which we need to invest in much more. There was a bit of divergence in terms of the Maltese results appearing to be more positive than the results achieved in the other countries. However, the people in the room who are based in Malta didn't feel that was as positive, because it doesn't mean that we are in the right place, but we definitely need to do more work. So there's more need for work over there. Again, it all needs to be understood in context. The context of Malta is quite specific, but there is a lot to learn. There was, again, the discussion of the need to promote more social mix and better integration of migrants. So how do we include this through housing, but also beyond housing? And the question of migrants versus status, which could also be something which would then fit into question 3 in terms of how we can move forward and what other evidence should we be looking at. So the question of status, the question of illegalities around access to housing, which are not always reported, for example, for fear, or lack of information, which again came out in all the findings that many of the migrants, of the migrant communities are not aware of what is available. So in general, yes, the need to promote this social mix and the need for more evidence and not to rest on the fact that it looked positive, but definitely focus on the need for more work and treat this exclusively as a start, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexia. And this is what I would like to add as well in at the end of this webinar and the end of this breakout rooms, that this is indeed a beginning. For us in the Come Home project, the idea was to take a solution-oriented approach, meaning that the data collection is the collection of data that feeds into, from one hand, concrete tools that may allow us to combat discrimination in access to housing. And this will be gathered in a toolkit that we will end and publish at the end of this project. And on the other hand, policy recommendations that go on a different level, let's say, and that would assist a creation of a more legal and united housing system that avoids discrimination. And this is why in this project, for example, we already started a collection of best practices, initiatives, projects that are already doing that. You can find all of that in the LinkedIn page that was just shared in the chat. And when we saw and we looked through those best practices, some things that were just said from the breakout rooms indeed came about. So, for example, the need to raise awareness around this topic and the need to find solutions that mediate and go towards also the landlords and the fears of the landlords about their housing and about their economical well-being, let's say, but also the value of their apartment, which unfortunately is still related also to racial notions. So I would say that coming from the report of today and from the breakout sessions, we are seeing that it's quite important also to define what is legal and illegal in the access to housing. We heard that homeowners and rental agencies are often not very openly or clearly say that they do not want to rent for people with migratory backgrounds, but behind the scenes or behind certain other ways of saying it arrives, and we have to understand what is happening exactly. And this is why also the notion of non-formal information being the main channel for people with migratory background is very interesting, because not having a formal way and not having the data and the information about what people are doing is also excluding us from actually continuing to improve and continuing to inform policies. So a better data collection also through informative systems, I think, is it something that we will look for. I end by saying that our three contexts, Malta, Thessaloniki, and Turin, are already prototyping and testing some solutions that go in these directions. And again, you are very welcome to stay updated on what is happening in the project and beyond. We are, I would say, 1 minute after time, or exactly on time, because we are, I think, in a Mediterranean spirit. And I will give the word to Roberto just to close. And I thank you all for being here and invite you to keep on following the projects and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Liat. Just wanted to say, which is important, I think I forgot to mention until now, that all what you have been seeing so far will be included in 3 reports, case study report for Turin, Thessaloniki, and Malta, which are going to be published soon, hopefully in by the end of June. And then you will find all the information there, plus much more, of course, including recommendations which were provided by the respondents themselves, so people with migratory background and stakeholders. Those recommendations are going to be used for the rest of the project, but they're also going to be available in the reports. And just to thank you all for your time and to remain until the very end. And have a nice rest of the day and see you next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.